Okay, hi all, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jessica Teggy and I am Restoration Program Manager for Ohio River Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization helping to coordinate the efforts of the Ohio River Valley SYSMA, which are the two programs that helped make this webinar possible today. We are very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Cory Christopher. Cory is the Director of Conservation at the Cincinnati Nature Center and has loads of experience on today's topic, filling the void, replanting natives after invasive eradication. This webinar will provide you with examples of natives that will work beautifully in your garden or yard and will help keep those invasive plants out. Also, if you missed our last webinar about invasive plant ID and removal techniques, you can find that webinar recording on the ORV SYSMA site, and I could drop that in the chat for you. Okay, great. So let's give a little love to the organizations here that made this possible. Ohio River Valley SYSMA, it stands for Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, and Ohio River Foundation. Let's start with SYSMA. SYSMA is a coalition of organizations, businesses that are working together to control invasive species in a 22 county area of the Ohio River Valley. So there are other SYSMAs across the US. And if you live in any of the counties highlighted on that map there, welcome home. The Ohio River Valley is your local SYSMA. And the premise is basically, if you can believe it, invasive species are not great at following property lines or even state lines, and they're spreading really quickly, which is truly devastating to our native plant populations. It's also leading to decreased biodiversity, poor habitats for wildlife, including the pollinators that help our food supply, and it's even lowering our water quality in the area. So we recognize that a coordinated approach offers the best chance of eradication. And on our website, we offer all kinds of help for homeowners, educational materials, educational opportunities, volunteer events located all over the tri-state, so that you can attend one that's near you and find out what plants are possibly likely taking over your neck of the woods and then how best to remove them. So go check us out. We're even developing an interactive invasive species removal counter, and our goal is 1 million invasives removed. So check back in like a week or two to the ORV SYSMA site to submit your contribution. Okay, Ohio River Foundation also gets a shout out. Ohio River Foundation is a 22-year-old environmental nonprofit focused on advocacy, habitat restoration, and education, all within the Cincinnati, Greater Columbus, and Lexington area. If you are interested in learning more about the Ohio River Foundation or becoming a member, please check us out at ohioriverfdn.org and or find us on social media. And without further ado, it's time for what everyone has been waiting for. Cory Christopher, our speaker today, excuse me, is the Director of Conservation at the Cincinnati Nature Center. So with an academic background in plant ecology and conservation and professional experience in leading transdisciplinary community action projects, Cory facilitates collaborative collaboration efforts aimed at protecting native ecosystems across Cincinnati and the tri-state area. As he is giving his presentation, please post your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end. And I think that is all I have. So Cory, I will stop sharing and then you can take it from there.
Okay. Thank you. Let me get this shared. I'm going to try to share. Actually, I need to start. All right, you're going to have to tell me if this is sharing. It should be, but on my end, it doesn't look like it is. What are you guys seeing right now?
Don't see a shared screen from you.
All right, let's go. Let's try this sucker again. We're just going to have to do it this way. You would think that after, I don't know if you guys heard about, we had this little thing, a pandemic the past couple of years. You might not have heard, and you would think that I would know. It would be so easy to start sharing screens now, but sometimes it just isn't. So I'm going to start all over because I can see it on my screen. There's no reason it shouldn't be shared.
I had this weird thing pop up that told me I had to click to exit full screen. And so once I clicked on the window, it allowed
What do you
me.
guys see? How about now?
Still nothing.
How about now?
Okay, we're good.
Oh, sweet. Okay. We're off like a herd of turtles. All right. I'm going to make this bigger so I can see people's face. How are you guys doing? Good.
Great.
You know, this, I'm going to just go ahead and disappoint you from the beginning. This might be a terrible talk. It might be a great talk. But we're just going to see how this goes. And the reason for that is when Jessica first asked me to do this, I thought it was going to be fun to give, basically just to tell you all my favorite plants and why you should put them in the ground after you remove invasives. But my background was focused on, think of it as particularly difficult management issues. So when you have multiple management things going on at once, land management issues, how do you go about prioritizing? And I don't have the answer for that, but what I did discover is there's not really an answer for that. So what I wanted to do today is I will give you some plants. I am going to be generous in that way, but I also wanted to make this a bit broader, and sort of take you back to where, I don't know, to sort of help you get into my head, which can be a scary place to be, but I hope it'll be useful for you. If you have questions, yeah, definitely put them in the chat. I'll try to keep up with the chat. I don't see the chat thing at the bottom of my screen now, but we can figure that out. Pull that up actually. And then towards the end, I've definitely left some time for us to ask questions. All right, there's the chat. All right, here we go. And we're off. So I titled this Filling the Void because I was interested, we're gonna move my camera over here so that I can actually see the screen I'm looking at. So I've got a couple monitors going on. Okay, so I initially titled this Filling the Void, Replanting Natives After Invasive Eradication. And that was right after Jessica had asked me to give the talk, and she demanded that I give her a title. She was quite aggressive with it. So I gave her a title, and later regretted it, but was terrified to change it. If you know her, you know what I mean. The reason for that is when we think about how do we replace natives after we've removed invasives, the problem is that traditionally land management has used this upper process that I'm circling with the cursor now. You usually go about planning your eradication, and then you implement your plan and you eradicate whatever it is you're hoping to eradicate, and then you replace natives, right? And so this gets tacked on at the end as almost optional, right? But instead, one of the I think more important or more effective ways of going about planning land management in terms of invasive species is starting with the native reintroduction planning. So at the very beginning, what is it that you're hoping to achieve with this area? Before you remove honeysuckle, what is it that you hope to put back? Are you going to put anything back? If not, why aren't you, or why can't you put anything back? So thinking about this, this whole filling the void, let's start thinking about it from a different perspective. So instead of, what do we put in after we removed invasives, let's start thinking about it as let's plan our eradication to support reintroduction instead of tacking reintroduction in at the very end. Does that make sense? to everybody. It's a small change, but I think it's important for us to begin seeing things that way. Now, I will say at the beginning, I try not to be too serious and too like, I don't want this to be doom and gloom. I do think these invasive posters are hilarious. But what I've seen in the media is, and especially on, like, there's a ton of Facebook and internet memes. What I've seen is that we're so focused on killing the invasives, getting rid of the invasives, but you don't hear as much about natives. And in fact, only in the past couple of years do we have a native plant month. And so I think it's important that we pivot just a bit, and instead of just focusing on the killing of invasives, let's figure out how do we support our native communities or native plant communities. But of course, I get it, because as someone who spent a lot of my time in sort of conceptual, theoretical, academic ecology, and now I find myself firmly in the middle of practice, at the end of the day, we still need to get rid of these invasives, right? I mean, I'm not going to pretend that we're out here hoping to achieve anything else. But I do want us to begin looking at invasive removal from a much broader perspective. So instead of seeing it as just getting rid of a population of invasive plants, let's start seeing this from the ecosystem perspective. And the reason that's important is this picture you're seeing here. I would say, if raise your hand, well, I can't even see you, but raise your hand even if I can't see you, if this has been the result of one of your invasive species eradication efforts. Who does this look familiar out there? Nobody. Okay, good, finally. So this looks like a successful invasive eradication, right? There's no invasives there. It looks pretty good. I even see somebody's driven a tractor in there. They're really getting rid of those invasives. But what have you created here? If this is the plan, if this was your goal to get rid of an invasive honeysuckle or whatever might have been here, and if this is the sign of a successful eradication, what have you actually achieved? Because I would argue that if you were hoping to restore a forest, whatever type of forest you might have had, beech maple forest over here, what you've done is effectively kicked back succession a little bit, right? Now, there were some trees left, so they didn't take everything, but you've pushed succession back just a little bit. And oftentimes when we do that, we assume that the plants we can replace, the native plants that we're going to replace the invasives with, we start putting in plants that happen over here. When in reality, maybe we need to put native shrubs that are earlier in a successional stage, because that's effectively what we've now pushed that forest back to. So let's use the example of honeysuckle. I know this is not the only invasive we have, but I think it's the one that most of us probably deal with the most. And it's the one that I spent way too many years of my life studying. And I thought I could keep up with the literature on it, but there's just no way. Each and every year, it seems like we're finding out something new about this plant. And a lot of that data is supposedly making land management easier, but really what it's doing is it just complicates all the things we have to think about. And if you're like me, there's some days where there's nothing else you can consider, because you just need to go and cut down that stand of honeysuckle. So I don't want to mislead anyone to think that this is the most important of the invasives. It's just, for me here at the Nature Center, and probably for you, it's what we fight the most. And it seems, in my mind, that it gets hopeless sometimes, because if you cut one and you don't get it painted with herbicide right away, they just come back, right? And it can be disheartening, and it can be frustrating. And I get asked, believe it or not, I really do get asked fairly often, is it worth it? Is it hopeless? And I say, no, there's absolutely hope. It's just that our view of eradication has tended to focus on like that picture that I showed you before, total annihilation of the invasive species. When today, a more reasonable and practical way of thinking about invasive species control is looking at functional eradication, which means you are getting rid of enough of that invasive that you no longer see those negative impacts on the systems they occur in. There is probably few systems from which we can remove all invasives, but we absolutely can get them to a level that we don't see those negative impacts, which is why we're managing these in the first place. So let's also shift our thinking away from we need to get 100% of the invasives to let's get as much as we can until we no longer see those negative effects. And then let's move on to a new system. Yes, that might mean that you're leaving some behind, but in terms of our resources, the input, unless you're just very lucky, you probably don't have all the resources you need, all the staffing, the money to get rid of every bush in the Midwest, every honeysuckle in the Midwest that you may want to get rid of. And in fact, the way in which we're going about getting rid of them, so whether you're using a forestry shredder, which is probably what they used in that picture I showed you, which is, imagine just like a giant electric razor on the front of a tractor that just buzzes everything down to the ground and shreds it. If you're using that method versus a more, let's say, subtle, sensitive method of you're going in, you're cutting individual shrubs, you're painting the top with an herbicide, and then you're hauling the brush out, or you're leaving the brush there. Those two methods for getting rid of the invasive can have very different results, and they can both be either supportive or of reintroducing a native, or you could use a method like the forestry shredder that can actually make it more difficult to replant natives. So this is why it's important for us to consider what we're going to replant while we're coming up with a method that we're going to use to get rid of the invasives. Now with honeysuckle, I do want to point out that there are a lot of confounding factors. We know, for example, that if you remove honeysuckle from an area, the types of species that you replace it with, the types of native species that you put in, can have differential success, differential survival based on things such as heat, soil, moisture, even deer. So this is, I did stick my paper in there, shameless plug. One of the things that I discovered is if you are removing honeysuckle from an area and you don't do anything to control the deer, you might actually be doing more damage to that system than if you left the honeysuckle. And so knowing your system, inventorying your system, and knowing exactly what's here, what other problems might there be, you may not always be able to control for those other problems, but you should at least be aware of them, because we do have enough information to tell us whether some of those confounding factors might actually interfere with your reintroduction efforts. And interestingly, in some systems, and again, I threw in another paper, I don't have that many paper. I could put all my papers up here on one page and nobody's read them, but I'm going to show you anyway. These, in some cases, if you've had an outbreak of honeysuckle and it's been around for, let's say, 20 years, the honeysuckle actually inhibits its own seedling success. And so in those cases, I'm often asked, well, honeysuckle's been around for so long, it's got these allelopathic impacts on the soil. What are we going to do when we want to replace a native? Well, you may not have to do anything because in some systems, the honeysuckle is actually taking care of that for you. It's actually inhibiting the growth of its seedlings. Now, why that is, we don't really know, but it's worth it to know some of these things at the onset of your eradication planning so that you can prepare for those issues and make sure that you're setting yourself up for success before you put native plants in the ground. So all of this so far, everything I've talked about today has sort of led up to what I think is a fairly simple point. If we aren't considering our reintroduction of natives at the very beginning of the planning, and if reintroduction of natives is not our primary goal, then we may be, one, doing more damage to that system than we are preventing, and two, we may be hindering future restoration efforts, such as, you have people that are going into some of these parks that we've removed honeysuckle from, and a couple years later they're putting native plants in the ground because they finally have the time and resources to do so. Depending on what you did to get rid of those invasives, those plants that they put in may or may not be successful. So begin looking at your invasive removal projects as being not about invasive removal, but about native plant reintroduction. Does that make sense with everybody? It's, again, a small point, but I think it's an important one. So now is where I actually want to be a little more, I guess, practical and realistic, because like I said, I know we still need to get rid of invasives. We want to get rid of and eradicate our invasives. And we also still want a list of good alternatives that we can replant. And I want to give you that list, like I said, and be generous, but I also sort of want to make another couple points that I think are important. Number one, when you remove invasives from an area, the first question you should ask is, should we reintroduce natives? Sounds like a silly question, especially after what I just said, but you may have some areas that you just don't need to reintroduce natives to. So for example, let's say that you go into an area and you notice that as you remove honeysuckle, that you're seeing some still spice bush still standing, or there might be some spice bush in an adjacent woodland. In some of those areas, you may not need to replace natives. There might be enough of a seed source to do that for you. So in order to determine whether or not to replace the natives, you really have to start again with what your goals are. Am I hoping to restore these forests to pristine condition? Am I hoping to simply get rid of all the invasives because there's just acres and acres of autumn olive and we just need to get rid of it? Then once you have your goal, like what is it you're hoping to achieve, then think about, all right, is this site, is it likely that it's going to be reinvaded by honeysuckle or by autumn olive or by whatever? And what are my natural sources? Both natural sources of natives. So are there natives nearby that could repopulate the area? But then also, what are the natural sources of invasives? If you remove honeysuckle and your neighbor does not, chances are your honeysuckle is going to come back as soon as birds eat those berries from your neighbor's yard, right? So once you've begun thinking about that, then you can think, okay, it looks as though I'm probably going to need to replace the natives. Now I need to think about availability. Which native plants are available on the market or available through partner organizations? What's available? What's out there? And of those things that are available, what's going to survive? And of these things that I now know will survive and are available, when am I actually going to plant them? Is it immediately after the reintroduction or the eradication, or is it a year later? And some of those answers are going to depend on what you're left with when you finish getting rid of the invasives. For example, I like, well, who wants to unmute themselves and tell me what this tree is? We'll just do a quiz time just to break up the monotony. And I'll call names because I see all your names here. All right, Jessica, what is this? I'm going to be nice. What is this? You're muted. I'm going to make you say it just to see if you're right or not.
I want to say dogwood.
Nope.
Oh.
Nope. This is box elder. It's a kind of maple. A lot of people call it a trash tree. Yep, Shirley got it, but I don't know if Shirley typed that after I'd already said it or not, so I won't call it shenanigans. But it's box elder. A lot of people call it trash tree because they grow everywhere. They love more rural areas. I happen to love them. Over here, what is this on the right? Shirley, what is this?
Spice
Lauren,
bush? Spice
nope.
bush?
No,
Nope.
it isn't. Lauren said pear. Kind of looks like pear, but it's not. Oh, Rich has got a nearly 100-year-old box on it because I love them and people think they don't live that long. They're gorgeous. Black cherry.
Oh.
Ding, 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 Sarah. It is a black cherry. Here's why I showed you these two in particular. Okay. Let's say that you have, remember that picture I showed you of the forest that had been completely cleared of invasives? They probably used a forestry shredder for that just by the looks of it, which probably means that the soil is really compacted after they're finished. That's just what that's what forestry shredders do, is they compact the soil just because they're so heavy. So now with these two pictures, you now have box elder and you now have cherry. Which one are you going to use to replace those? Are you going to use a box elder to replace the honeysuckle, or are you going to use black cherry? And for now, let's not focus too much on whether it's shrub or tree, because it could have been tree of heaven. It could have been, whatever else. But you now have these two species. Both are readily available on the market, and both would do fine in an understory. Which one do you choose? What are you going to think about? Almost everybody I ask always says sunlight and moisture. Well, I usually say duh. But there's more to that than just sunlight and moisture. What else is going on? I'm looking at my chat now. Somebody type it in. And then I'll help you. Soil. Question mark? Yes. In particular, soil compaction. In these two examples, cherries are not tolerant of compacted soil. If you put a young cherry into super compacted soil, it is not going to thrive. Box elder, on the other hand, can survive in cement. It does not care if the soil is compacted or not. And if you say, well, but Cory, we don't want a forest of just box elder. Those tend to be plants that are sort of younger. That's not what we're looking for. Agreed. But maybe you need to put box elders in for the first 10 years. And then you need to go back to the side and begin introducing some of these other trees that you'd like to see there. In some cases, it's a matter of phasing it so that you're preparing the soil for future plantings. Just like that graphic of succession I showed you. At each successional stage, plants in those stages are changing that habitat in a way that can be supportive of the next successional stage. And we may have to mimic that when we're reintroducing natives. Some of the options, I put this up here, I'm not going to claim that always replacing invasives with natives is the appropriate thing to do. And I know that sounds like heresy. First, I would never plant a Bradford pear. But if I was doing a urban street tree planting, and I needed some trees to put in some median areas or put in areas with high salt content, whose roots tend to not interfere, let's say sidewalk, I might choose ginkgo. I'm not saying 100%, but I'm saying when you think about reintroductions, 100% think native first. But you may have some situations in which natives just are not going to be the best option. But again, think of phasing. Is there a way for you to reintroduce something that might not be native, but that you can control later and then introduce natives? I wanted to give you some scenarios. I get menu anxiety. Anybody else? You give me more than one option and I'm going to be, I just get anxious. Let's say that you remove honeysuckle and you're now left with very bare compacted soil. Okay. And you're trying to figure out what plant you want to put in. One of my favorite natives, just because I just think it's beautiful, is goat's beard. If you're familiar with goat's beard, it's got these really pretty sort of almost weeping willow-like flowers. Does really well in shade. You can have it in partial sun too. It is pretty good in drought conditions. It doesn't care about soil fertility that much. And it spreads pretty quickly through rhizomes, but because of that, it needs a little bit of a litter layer. So if you've got completely bare soil, it may not be your best choice if you need it to colonize quickly, because it needs that litter layer. Or you may need to replace the litter layer after you've removed honeysuckle, right? You may need to prepare the soil for the plants that you want to put in. So if you were planning this, a honeysuckle removal effort, you could start by saying, okay, which plants do we want to put back in there? And if this plant came to the top of your mind, then you know, okay, after we remove honeysuckle, we're gonna have to import some leaves. See if we can get some leaves from some of the like city leaf collection projects to dump back into this site so that we can begin rebuilding that litter layer, right? And had you just chosen your native reintroductions sort of after the fact, you may not have set yourself up for success. Goat's beard doesn't tend to be a very strong competitor. So if you've already got some invasives in there, like let's say you've got some garlic mustard and you just couldn't get rid of it all, goat's beard is not a particularly strong competitor. But one that I love is wild ginger. It is a fantastic ground cover. It's becoming more available in the market. It still needs a litter layer, but it spreads really quickly, and it can form a mat and inhibit a lot of other seeds that might germinate. It also loves compacted, poor soils, and importantly, if you've got a little, even a small like hoop house, you can propagate it fairly easily vegetatively. You just put it on the ground with a whole bunch of litter, and you can collect as many seeds or divisions as you want from this. So it's really easy to propagate. Another scenario, you remove honeysuckle, but your neighbor does not. Now you know, okay, we're going to remove honeysuckle, but the people next door are not. What are we going to do to make sure that the plants we put in are successful? Well, what do we have in our area? What is already there? Well, spice bush is pretty common. We know it's very tolerant of soils, of poor soils. It tends to provide a lot of shade, and honeysuckle in particular, honeysuckle seedlings don't like shade. So it tends to be a good competitor and reduce the reinvasion of honeysuckle. Readily available. Most stores that have native plants will have this. Well, I would say increasingly so. But it's also fairly easy to grow from seed. Another consideration is if I put a plant in the ground, what's the likelihood that I can reproduce that plant myself? How can I propagate it? With spice bush, well, I'm going to put it in the ground, and then I'm going to come back in like August, September, and I'm going to pull those berries off, and I'm going to spread them into a new area, right? In your initial planning of that project, you would have considered that. You would have said, once I reintroduce honeysuckle, I'm choosing that species because I want to be able to quickly reproduce it, quickly propagate it on my own. So that would have been an explicit consideration. Another one that we all face, if you've got really poor soil, but I don't know if you guys know, again, I mean, the pandemic was bad, and some of you know about that. But deer, do you guys know deer will eat native plants, eat things right out of your yard? I mean, who knew? They can really interfere with the success of a reintroduction, and it's a real problem. Which was actually, I'm not even going to go into it. This was my dissertation topic, honeysuckle and deer, and so I could go on and on for days. I won't. The point, though, is that when you're beginning your eradication project in our area in Southwest Ohio, the tri-state, you must consider deer. You must, because if you remove honeysuckle and you don't do anything for deer, and you've got a problem with deer, you absolutely will be doing more damage than you are good. In this case, let's say you have poor soil, and so you want a plant that maybe doesn't need a lot of nutrients. New Jersey tea is great for that because it actually fixes nitrogen from the air, so it can help create nutrient-rich soil. The problem with that, though, well, let's say not the problem, because it's also got a deep taproot, so compacted soil doesn't matter. But the problem is deer love it and will eat it right away, but it's very drought tolerant, right? So if you've got an area that you've taken care of the deer and you don't have the resources to constantly go back and water, New Jersey tea might be a great option. But if you know, wait a minute, we've got way too many deer for this, I don't know if that's going to work. Well, okay, then maybe we can use pepperbush, clethra. But with clethra, same thing, it tolerates clay soil, doesn't have to be well drained. It likes partial shade, that'd be great. Deer don't eat it, that's perfect. But it's not drought tolerant, which means if we plant this, we either better be near a water source, or we better be willing to go out with a water tank on the back of a car or RTV, right? And again, these would have been things that you thought about at the beginning so that you can prepare yourself for those things. For instance, I know Jessica has to work a lot with basically choosing where she's going to lead these invasive species removal projects. And some of the things you have to consider is, let's say you've got two organizations that want you to come out and remove honeysuckle. And let's say all else being equal, one is near a water source and one is not. If your goal is to eventually reintroduce natives, being near a water source is a big plus. I'm trying to click it. So I wanted to give you sort of some do's and don'ts. I think my land manager can probably hear me in there. She's giggling because she can't hear me. So Olivia Espinoza is our land manager, and she and I had a discussion yesterday about this. And one of the things that I wanted to do is to present sort of some do's and don'ts of this, because I know I didn't give you these beautiful, gallery of natives to plant. But I'm going to give you some sources later, but I'm looking at my time and I want to be respectful. Let's do the do's. First, if you're going into eradication project, know your goal. Are you trying to increase diversity? Are you just trying to enhance ecosystem function? Do you just want to reduce erosion? What are you achieving here besides just getting rid of the invasive? What are the locally appropriate ecotypes? If you're trying to replant purple coneflower and you go to Lowe's and you buy I think it's called like pom-pom purple coneflower, the little leaflets in the middle of the coneflower where the cone was, pollinators can't get the proboscis down into there. So that cultivar, even though it's a cultivar of a native, is useless, right? So think about locally appropriate ecotypes. What are the compounding factors? Are there deer? Does my neighbor have this invasive? In logistics, water. Am I going to be able to water this? If not, what am I going to do? Inventory the area. Do I even need to plant natives? Maybe there's enough seed sources here that I don't need to do anything. Use more than one method. Don't just rely on plants or plugs. Use seeds, plants, and plugs. I'm involved with the research project now with Northern Kentucky University, trying to assess which of those methods might be better, but we just don't know right now. So I suggest using a variety of methods for replanting. And then plan your reintroduction during the initial planning, even if that means you agree not to reintroduce. It's important to consider it, because if you're looking at your goals, if your goal is to bring back an old growth forest, you're probably going to need to do some replanting, right? So even if your decision is not to do anything, you still need to make it at the beginning. Some easy don'ts: don't overplant, don't go crazy. You're going to rely on those plants to colonize the area. The way I like to look at it is, if you put a plant in the ground and it doesn't do well, then chances are it probably wasn't going to survive there long term anyway. Don't disturb the soil needlessly. Soil compactor: if you don't need a forestry shredder, don't compact the soil by using a forestry shredder, because you don't need to do that. You don't need to open up the soil and potentially encourage weed seeds coming in. Don't be hasty. You may have to wait a year or two before you replant, which means you're going to have to go back out there every once in a while and see what's going on, see what it looks like. Same time though, don't wait too long, because we all know those invasives come in really quickly. And don't be afraid to ask others for input. Like, none of us know all the native or invasive plants out there. You just can't. And so it's just relying on each other to help. I found some resources I want to present, and I'm doing okay with time. The Cleveland Metro Parks put out a technical report in 2017, and there is a few beautiful tables of natives and some of the qualities of those natives that will help you make some of these decisions I just talked about. I was really impressed with it, so I highly suggest checking that out. Not all the natives they have on there are necessarily appropriate for us. Most of them are, though, fortunately. If you haven't discovered the Audubon Plant for Birds website with your zip code, I love it, because you just, let's say that Jessica is going to an area, way east of the city, and she's like, I don't really know what species are here. Like, they could be anything. Just type in the zip code and it will tell you what those natives are that you can plant there. And then you can sort of look back at that Metro Parks publication to see what the qualities of those are. But Audubon does a pretty good job too. And lastly, I put this up here because it's one of my favorite comics. Just be willing to look at reintroductions as science, right? If you put a plant in the ground after you've removed an invasive, monitor the site. Go back and see, did that plant take? Did it survive? Did it reproduce? And after a few years, you're going to have a list of which plants you know are doing best in the situations you're working in. So don't look at failures as being a failure. Look at them as science. Like, the more you fail, the more science you're doing. Like this little comic shows. And with that, I think I'm a little over, but I'll end and take questions, comments, concerns, complaints, compliments. And I'm going to move my camera back so you can actually see my face too. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. And what do you guys got for me? I can look at the chat. Let me start with the chat. Whoa. Okay, John Seymour. Hey, John. I haven't seen you in a while, buddy. So seeding versus shoots have huge differences in cost time. I know that there are a variety of calculators out there for this kind of work. I don't know of a single one that helps you compare things like costs or effectiveness. I don't know of one personally. If anyone on here knows of one, I would love to have it. I don't know of one. But John, you've been in this field a lot longer than I have, a whole lot longer, because he's super old if you don't know him. He could probably help us a lot with that. I'm just kidding. I love you, John. So down in the floodplain along the rivers, this is John again. Invasives are often different than the uplands. Yep. Survival of the native replacements. Are there any special considerations for suppressing the waterborne invasives? So one of the ones that we're worried about is lesser celandine, Picaria. because we find the little corms in water samples now, and so we know they're absolutely waterborne and they're moving downstream. I'm not ashamed to admit I don't know of how to suppress waterborne invasives. What I will say is we do use herbicide, but we've been very careful to always use aquatic safe herbicides. And we try to prioritize, like if you're in charge of a stretch of stream and you have some waterborne invasive like Ficaria, you really do have to work sort of strategically, right? So you need to start, I don't know if you would start upstream or downstream. Actually, I guess either. John, I don't know. You've that sort of you've stumped me. I don't know. I don't know of any considerations for suppressing. If I did, we would not have as much Ficaria. So if you know, John, seriously, unmute yourself and tell us, because I just don't know of any special considerations. I'm thinking in my head and I don't. Native
Yeah,
fishes. Yeah, John.
Cory,
Yeah.
I was just typing away here, but basically, we find that we're constantly being surprised by where these waterborne things are. You look 1 year and you've got a clean area, and then the next year you look and all of a sudden you've got an acre of Japanese chaff flower or something of that nature.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it has to be just plain vigilance as to where things are. The problem becomes then, okay, if these things are jumping around like frogs, well, how do you go back in there and put something back in that is going to hold that area, or are you pretty much limited to the fact that you knock it out and hope stuff goes back that's going to be appropriate? So we're still trying to figure out what that does for us.
We are too, if it helps. And if we find it, I'll certainly tell Jessica so she can get the word out. Steve asks about which are more tolerant of wet soils, or Tom even ponding. I love buttonbush for that. I have one in my yard that regularly gets flooded with ponding. Buttonbush you can't beat. Butterflies flock to it. Ducks for some reason love it. So 100% buttonbush. I'm not afraid of using willow. Some people don't like it because it can get pretty dense. It can get a little bossy and aggressive, but I don't shy away from it. Clethra, the one that I showed before, sweet pepperbush, also likes soils that are a little wet. It's also deer resistant. It's one of those that I call sort of pseudo natives here. It is native, but it would be rarer to find it in the wild here than, let's say, a little further south, but I still use it. And spicebush actually likes wet soils. It doesn't like standing water, but it can absolutely tolerate like stream bank plantings. And yes, the Cleveland Metro Parks report, all those two things I showed you are available online. I don't know where I found that technical report though. It was online. I found it just yesterday, honestly. So yes, it is available in its entirety online if you just type in the name. And then local nurseries that have a nice selection of native bushes. Well, it just so happens that we have a native plant propagation program here at the Nature Center. We have a fall sale coming up in September. Check the cincynature.org website because I don't remember the date off the top of my head. But here's what I can say. If you've got, if there are large projects and you need a source for native plants for reintroduction, reach out to me because we do have a native plant nursery in Goshen, and we have a greenhouse here. Even if we don't have a public sale going on, I still want to help you. And so reach out to me, tell me that you need to go to the nursery and see some stuff, and I'll make sure you get taken care of. The other options, you can always go to Keystone in the east side. Well, not really east side. I mean, not east side, west side. It's not really west side. It's near Spring Grove Cemetery. If you go there, look up the address. You're going to think you're lost because it goes down. It looks a little scary, but they have a lot of good native options. And then I don't get any money for doing this. I'm going to put in a plug for Natorps now. They have been doing a lot with natives. They have a lot more, they're a lot more educated now than they were when I first got here. And I've been very impressed in the past 2 to 3 years at the selection of natives they have. So don't overlook some of those. And then here's a little hack. If you go, I'm not going to suggest a particular big box store, but there's one that's blue, not orange, and they regularly put their plants out on clearance. And the clearance plants, for whatever reason, people don't buy some of the natives after they've stopped blooming. And you can sometimes rack up on natives in the clearance section of the blue home improvement store, not the orange one. The orange one's probably fine, but the blue one always has natives on clearance. Don't know why. Just please don't go to the one on 28 because that's the one I go to. And that's any other questions?
Anything else? Thank you all that were able to hang out with us today. Thank you, Cory, for your expertise and your time. Thank you to Cincinnati Nature Center for allowing us to steal you for an hour. If anyone has questions at a later time, please do not hesitate to reach out, pencil down that information on the screen there. And don't forget, if you are interested in attending more similar webinars like this one, please stay in touch, join our mailing list, because there will be more. Don't forget about social media. This recording will be available soon. It'll be posted on the SYSMA site, orvsysma.org, as well as the Ohio River Foundation sites. But thank you so much. Thank you, Cory. Thanks for joining us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.
Thanks all.